All right. Hello. Welcome, everyone, to the House of Mystery, the John Constantine and Friends podcast. I am Michael, your host, and in the studio with me today is the demon bisexual butler, David. Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Okay. So you and I, Dave, are going to be taking a very deep dive into the 2014 Constantine series, the very short-lived 2014 series. What a travesty.
It is. It is. And I'm sure we're going to get into it.
I mean, what a complete travesty when they decided to cancel a show before it even really had a chance to find its legs, even though the first season was overall pretty sound.
And well received.
Yes, critically it was well received. Unfortunately, there were some ratings issues. All right, so if you have just discovered our show, you can find all of our shows, past, present, and in the future, wherever you listen to podcasts. But our preferred feeds are Apple Podcast and Spotify. If you are a YouTube viewer, be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe. So, Dave, this is a discussion that has been a long time coming. It's been gestating for quite some time. And we are finally, at the end of the year, sitting down to formally analyze the short-lived series. Now, just to set the tone, so listeners know what to expect, this isn't a recap or a breakdown of the episode. That's already been done.
Yes.
By countless people, and to be quite frank, that's fucking boring. Traditional reviews are boring. That's why we don't do that on this network. Very seldom do we do typical reviews, unless our PR company asks us to, which they do from time to time. Will send us screeners and say, can you review this? And of course we do, because that's the give-take relationship, right, David?
Oh, no, absolutely.
So this is a deep analysis of the pilot episode, which we will be breaking into parts, because there's no way we can do a deep analysis in under an hour.
Oh, no, absolutely. Especially in regards to this show, because it is the sole iteration that we as Hellblazer fans have when it comes to Hellblazer in the live action.
What about Arrowverse?
Well, that's the thing, is because of this show too, a lot of the elements that were in this show had to bleed over into a lot of the Arrowverse other shows.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that probably we probably have to cover, is this part of the story is going to be covered in another part of one of the other Arrowverse shows, whether it's, I think some of it was covered in The Flash and the other was covered in
no, it was Arrow and Legends.
Arrow and Legends, that's right.
Yeah. Which, I mean, we've said our piece on those shows, as well as Constantine's involvement. Honestly, the best part of Legends was Matt Ryan's involvement in the series, just to be very honest there. Okay, so this is a series, David, that, in my opinion, did just about everything right. Now, that doesn't mean the series was perfect, but it does mean that the creators of the series, Daniel Cerrone and David S. Goyer, had a solid handle and understanding of the Constantine character and the world of Hellblazer.
Yes. Absolutely, because that was the thing about this iteration of Hellblazer. This was probably the closest to the comic book that all comic book fans are familiar with of John Constantine that we ever got.
Yeah.
And
it isn't a one-to-one adaptation.
It's not a one-to-one, but it's the closest representation we got.
And it's effective and done right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it in every sense of tone and theme, especially when you take a look at it as a show, this isn't your normal superhero show. This has mixtures of horror, gothic storytelling, everything that reminds me of Vertigo, of the old Vertigo, detective, film noir, and type of storytelling. That is what I was seeing in this show, and it's one of those really tough things about this show when it comes to actually going back and doing a deep dive on it, because you see a lot of the hidden potential that it could have had. And one of
Yeah.
the things that I always felt was like, if this were like released, say, in today's environment, I honestly think Constantine would still be around. You would have a season 2, even probably up to a season 4.
Possibly. I mean, 2014 was still early on in the whole craze of Marvel putting out solid content. That was
Yes.
during what? That was still phase 1 bleeding into phase 2 for
Mhm.
Marvel. So the so-called superhero fatigue definitely was not a thing yet.
Mm-mm.
So the cancellation behind Constantine still remains a bit of a mystery.
A mystery.
I mean, on paper, technically it was canceled due to ratings, but that's a whole other thing that we'll talk about during a later discussion because it warrants its own discussion where we focus on what happened, what was going on with the with NBC at the time. But for the purposes of this discussion today, and for better context, the series did benefit from NBC's early to mid 2010s push into darker and mature content.
Yes.
Something they had initiated, if memory serves me correct, to combat the growing original programming market that started budding with the onslaught of cable channels that were all vying to compete with paid channels like HBO, Showtime, Starz, AMC, FX.
Yeah.
They were all putting out original programming. That wasn't a thing until right around, I'd say 2013, 2014 is when everyone started pushing in very aggressively into original programming. Interestingly, this is in a lot of ways, this was similar to or I would say it's actually an antecedent event that would pave the way for the media and pop culture phenomenon that would later be referred to as the rise of the streamers.
Yes.
Something we're facing right now. So network television was facing that need to compete with cable television 10 plus years ago. And now cable television, as well as network television or linear television, they are now trying to compete with the rise of the streaming.
With the rise of the streaming. And especially like with the rise of a lot of those shows that started not just also being embraced by customers and fans, but also critically. Like during that time, so many other networks were trying to chase some notoriety of bringing in critical television because of like the success of AMC and Breaking Bad and
Yes.
and all of it, and even like go even further and go back to like the days of like FX and The Shield, where you had more and more critically acclaimed TV shows being awarded, and also because not just that they were critically acclaimed, but they were bringing in really big, solid numbers.
I think the easiest way to capture the movement of higher quality programming is cinematic.
Yeah.
Everyone was pushing for a cinematic flair that had originated with HBO when it comes to television.
Yeah, it goes back to like nowadays. It's like someone I remember seeing this as a talk in a film critic circle that I was listening to, where they were talking about how television networks were constantly now are even today chasing the water cooler moment. They were looking for a show to basically create that environment again where it's that you are constantly talking about it. Like when Breaking Bad came out, that was water cooler moment. Everyone was talking about it the following day. They would turn in the next day. They would constantly be streaming
For that final
that show.
season of Breaking Bad, yes, that's definitely what happened.
And that's the magic that basically a lot of networks now were chasing. And they basically, a lot of people broke it down. Well, it was mature content. It was the quality of the show. Bigger budget meant better numbers.
less procedurals, episodic, and more serialized.
And that was the thing that basically, I think this show and Constantine, going back to this, it was caught in, unfortunately, the wrong time. Because looking back at it, the
It was put out during a crossroads moment.
it was a crossroads moment.
Yeah.
But if you saw Constantine be released today, I honestly think that it would have done much better.
I would agree with that. There are a lot of other factors, but just right off, without thinking and sitting down overly analyzing the landscape, I would agree. I would agree. Now, unfortunately, though the series was received relatively favorably by mainstream critics, as you were saying, Dave, it failed to capture the broader mainstream audience, and the series was canceled after just a single season. And we'll get into the pros and cons, if you can even find any pros to that, in a later discussion. Now, in the realm of screenwriting, especially within the craft of creating a pilot episode, Daniel Cerrone or Cerrone, please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing the last name. It's either Cerrone or Cerrone. It depends on how he wants to pronounce it. I'm not sure. So Daniel Cerrone demonstrates his value as a writer because in under 50 minutes, Cerrone introduces the series, adhering to the established and effective methodology of the 5 W's, which is something I talk about. The who, the what, the where, the when, the why. There's no having to wait for the second episode. There's no having to wait for a quarter of the season to be released before we understand what's at stake. By the end of the episode, we don't have all the answers, but we definitely know what this series is about. And that is something, David, that I miss with television today. Because even though we have moved into more cinematic, high-quality television, the writing does, in fact, lack just a bit when compared to the old days of cable television. And when I say the old days, I'm talking like 6 years ago, 7 years ago is when this really started to turn in a direction that I didn't particularly care for. Now, David, if they were to write this pilot episode today, I guarantee you that 90% of the substance, the plot, the motivation, the who, what, where, and when wouldn't have even been put in the first episode, and it would have been piecemealed out or very slowly handed out over the course of 8 episodes or 9 episodes.
Yes.
When you have to write a pilot episode or just television back in the old days for linear TV, you have very strict rules. There are very quick beats. There are specific beats, I should say, specific beats that you must hit in order for the show to work on television. And in a lot of ways, it has to do with advertising, keeping people's attention, which, I mean, that shouldn't go away. We should always think, how can I liven this moment up so that I can maintain the audience? So that's something this episode did as well, very well. So by the episode's conclusion, a broad understanding emerges concerning the key players, including protagonists, potential threats, and lurking antagonists. Moreover, the narrative sets up the diegesis or story world, revealing how this world operates. We literally understand everything about this world. Beyond mere exposition, though, the pilot also establishes a tonal foundation through the incorporation of Judeo-Christian iconography and carefully chosen settings reminiscent of American Gothic and film noir. The tone is completely crafted. By the end of the episode, you understand what world this series takes place in and what type of key characters we are going to be dealing with each episode. This is discernible not only through narrative choices, but also through intentional lighting selections. The result is a deliberate and artful construction that adds depth to the storytelling and sets the stage for the unfolding series.
Yes.
Now, David, that's my introduction, but I want to know what your thoughts are on this pilot before we move forward.
My thoughts on this pilot, it's amazing because like it's been a while since I've actually rewatched this series. And an initial rewatching of it, it honestly makes me angry. And not because of like, oh, they did a terrible job in the show. No, they did a very adequate job. Just like what you said, they did everything right for this show to be successful. And in rewatching the pilot, I'm like going, they did everything right. Why the hell did they not be given more of a shot than just one season? And it goes to like what you were saying. They were in a environment that basically was not in their advantage, because after rewatching it, I felt that basically if this show was released today, it would arguably be top 3 best superhero shows right now. It would.
But I also think that if it was released today, I don't think the writing would be nearly as tight.
That's the scary part too, is like, you're right. The writing back then was much more tighter. And I don't want to sound like an elitist when it comes to...
No, go ahead. This is the show for that.
To saying, proper, etiquette when it comes to being a writer in our industry or being a filmmaker. But in all honesty, filmmaking and writing today has turned lazy, because just like what you said, they don't want to stick with their guns and basically, one of the things that we are taught early on in film school and in writing school is you got to hook your audience early. But you're right. Today's audience, it's almost like, no, our way of hooking our audience is making them question and want to come back for the next episode.
Making them wait. Indefinitely, seemingly indefinitely.
And that's,
just to simply know what the character, why is he here in this moment?
Exactly.
What's his motivation? Now, you'll find out all of that by the end.
But like, the thing is, that's a good technique. But unfortunately, it's a gateway into lazy, terrible writing.
When you don't have specific beats that you must hit, what happens is a lot of writers nowadays in television tend to not even try to hit those beats because they're not required. And because of that, you do have a lot of very loose narratives that oftentimes run away from the writing staff.
And just meander.
Yeah.
They just meander. And it's like...
But people don't notice it oftentimes, Dave, because the shows have such high production value now that people see a pretty image and think the show's good.
But here's the thing, though. Now you're seeing like a sudden turn, I think, in the audience, where the audience is like going, yeah, that's pretty and all. But now they're getting tired of that meandering type of writing, where it's like, we're going to, you mean to tell me you're going to make me wait to get to your point, but hey, these pretty pictures are really nice.
And we're not talking against slow burn, okay? Slow burn is fine. A lot of times people will use that word or that phrase as a way to justify a writing staff that is just meandering all over the place.
Yeah.
A good example of a slow burn tactic is the first season of The Walking Dead and most of Breaking Bad.
Mm-hmm.
Those are good examples of slow burn narratives done the right way. They give you the information that you must know to maintain your interest, but they also give it to you very slow, methodically at times, in order to build an atmosphere.
Yes.
That is fine. But the W's, the 5 W's, and the 1H, the how, it's there.
It's there. And
it's just done a little more subtly.
And I'm glad you bring up the rule of the 5 W's, because like in a lot of people like writers nowadays do not put their emphasis on those 5 questions that they have to ask themselves. And the one thing I've learned in all my times of trying to write and trying to understand our craft, the 5 W's do so much for your story, because not only does it push your narrative forward, but it makes your audience care about these characters. And that is the most important thing. You bring up the whole point about, oh, well, it was a slow burn and a lot of people do, slow burn for Walking Dead. Well, you know why it worked in Walking Dead? Because we cared about Rick in the very beginning, and we were like really enthralled with his character. Why? Because they at least answered all 5 W's. They answered who he was. They answered what. They answered what was going on. They answered when,
Yeah.
and they did all the right things. But nowadays, people will, like writers. I look like, say, at a show, say, and I like the show, but it did the 5 W's kind of wrong, and the writing was kind of wonky. Was Moon Knight? Their 5 W's they took forever to actually answer.
Yeah.
Who was Moon Knight? It took them half of the season to get to the point of actually answering Mark Spector.
The last episode, they finally gave us more context to who this character really is,
Yeah.
which I think is a horrible mistake.
It's a horrible mistake. If they answered the who, like at least by episode 2, it would have been better.
Yeah.
But
Now,
that's the thing.
David, now, okay, so let's, just for fun, just to prove a point here, okay? Let's take the 5 W's right now and answer the question. So, who identifies the characters integral to the narrative? The pilot episode introduced Constantine,
Constantine?
the angel.
Mm-hmm.
What is his driver? His driver's name? Jesus.
Oh my God. I just actually
It introduces Constantine, Zed at the end.
Yes.
Chaz, the angel
Chaz.
Manny, and then Aberdeen.
Mm-hmm. All key players of your story. Those are the ones that are important.
Now the second W, what? Unveiling the central events, actions, and main ideas. Central events, demons are crossing over. They're not supposed to. Aberdeen is involved in all this somehow. Manny wants to recruit Constantine. Those are the main ideas. Where? Establishing the locations and settings of the unfolding events. We know exactly where we are. We have a very clear idea, understanding. The when, we understand the when. The temporal context isn't that difficult because it essentially takes place in our time period.
Yes.
The why, delving into the motivations and causes behind the depicted events. We understand the motivations. We understand the existential motivations. We understand the narrative motivations. And we understand the plot motivations.
Yes.
And now the how, the 1H, focusing on the methods, processes, and mechanisms at play. And that aspect is also there because it brings everything together through the process of methodology, proper methodology, and how it pertains to the craft of writing. So, David, again, this is why I say, was the episode perfect? Could it have done a few things differently? Sure. But if I was grading this on, can you write an episode of television and that was it, it would get an A+, because everything is done the right way. Okay, David, so let's move into our first analysis, okay? But setting the table more clearly to refresh the memories of our listeners.
Yes.
Potentially here, they may have forgotten all of the details of the series. So Constantine is an American occult detective drama television series developed by Daniel Cerrone and David S. Goyer for NBC. It was based on the DC Comics character of the same name, as well as the film adaptation. It stars Matt Ryan as John Constantine, an English exorcist and occult detective who hunts supernatural entities. Although the series was canceled after its first season, Matt Ryan would go on to reprise his role in the Arrowverse franchise, which retroactively established Constantine as part of the same continuity. Matt Ryan also would return as Constantine in the DC animated movie universe and his animated spin-off series, Constantine, City of Demons, as well as The Apocalypse War and The House of Mystery.
Yes.
The synopsis for the pilot episode, John Constantine, an unscrupulous exorcist and master of the dark arts, recovers in a mental institution following a failed exorcism, which resulted in his soul being damned. He receives a supernatural warning about Liv Aberdeen, who is threatened by mysterious forces. Constantine gives her a pendant that belonged to her father, allowing her to see trapped souls, and he introduces her to scrying, which is a mystic art that predicts where demonic activity will occur. So let's take a look at the pilot episode's actual title. That's where we're going to begin our deep analysis for this episode. So, non est asylum. So just to demonstrate just how in control of the material this team had, David, we can simply analyze the title of the pilot episode itself.
Yeah.
To me, David, it says a lot about a writing staff when titles of individual episodes mean something to the actual episode. I'm a big fan of that. I know there are a lot of TV shows that they're very random with the titles and they don't mean much.
But when they use it to have a meaning for your story, it just helps.
Why not use every tool at your disposal to clue people in on things pertaining to your series?
Yes.
A title is a easy way to say something overtly, literally overtly, without having to say it within the episode itself. Or at least it can allow people to keep their attention focused on a potential theme. So if they understand the title, they can then move into the episode with a type of lens that will help them understand the subtext as well as the text itself, right?
Yes.
So non est asylum draws a parallel. This gets really interesting to the legal concept of non est factum.
Factum, yep.
Offering insightful connections to both Constantine's character and the underlying themes of the episode. Interestingly, non est factum is simply legal jargon that in contract law is a defense that essentially argues it's not my deed.
Yes.
It allows a party to escape a contract if they can demonstrate that what they signed is fundamentally different from what they intended, or if they signed it by mistake without understanding its true meaning.
Yes.
Now, applying this legal concept to the episode title suggests a potential conflict or misunderstanding in the context of Constantine's actions or decisions.
And
I think people can start to see where I'm going with this.
especially if you're a Constantine fan.
Yeah. It sets the stage for questioning whether the situations he faces are truly of his making or if there's a deeper unintended aspect to his involvement. As most Constantine readers and enthusiasts know, Dave, he's a character who often finds himself entangled in supernatural and occult dealings, and his actions may have, as we have discussed in detail in other episodes, unintended consequences.
Yeah.
We can look to the Astra situation as an example of this.
Yeah. His original origin story is just based and dripping with that.
Even what they're using as a bit of an existentialist type of theme for Constantine himself, or I should say more of a guilt theme that gives Constantine a bit of motivation. It also motivates the plot in a lot of ways. So we can now see where a title like this starts to work in favor for the narrative, or I should say favorably for the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Now, from a theoretical perspective, one can interpret and extract more substance and meaning, looking deeper into the implications of the chosen title. A thesis forms. The use of non est asylum could also imply a denial or rejection of asylum,
Yes.
which could symbolize Constantine's resistance to seeking refuge or protection. It suggests that Constantine might have distanced himself from conventional forms of safety or sanctuary, possibly due to the complexities of his past or the dangers associated with his involvement in the occult. Or even more appropriate, By combining non-est with asylum, the title suggests a negation of refuge, reinforcing the idea that Constantine may find himself in situations where conventional forms of protection or safety are not fitting for him. Subjectively, the character carries guilt and feels he does not deserve sanctuary nor
There you go.
reprieve.
And that in itself fits the Constantine character to a T.
Yeah.
When it comes to understanding Constantine as a narrative character. His whole theme in Constantine is about a person that is thrust into a situation that he cannot control, nor can he, quote unquote, win the day as easily as others. There's a price that he always has to pay, because that is the price of the good, quote, in air quotes, the good that he does. And that's why, like, the whole idea of the use of the title non-est asylum is, it goes in so many cool directions for his character, especially in regards to the story they're trying to tell, because from all accounts, when you look at the synopsis of the story, Constantine puts himself into the asylum as kind of like a guilt for what happens.
It's like a penance.
A penance.
Yeah.
And in doing so, using basically the title, there is no asylum, there is no penance for Constantine.
Mm-hmm.
Because no matter what, he still damned that girl to hell. And the demon still took her soul. It doesn't matter if he could stop it or not. It's just the fact the consequence of that will always be there, is not changing.
Yeah.
So him going into asylum as kind of like a penance or out of guilt means nothing.
Yeah.
There is no asylum. There is no, and like it ties so well with what you brought up about the actual legal jargon that the title is based on,
Mm-hmm.
because in a lot of ways, John didn't understand what he was getting himself into. He was just doing what he probably thought was the right thing to do.
With the Astra situation?
Yeah, with the Astra
Yeah.
situation. He was and when you look at actually the actual character origin of that character back in the Vertigo days,
Mm-hmm.
he was in over his head. He thought he was doing the right thing. It turns out he was in over his head. He was dealing with powers that were well above his power level, so to speak. And he paid the price for it.
Yeah.
But instead of him paying the price, someone else had to pay the price for him.
And just by looking at all this, like what we have just been covering over the last 5 minutes pertaining to the title, David, I mean, it goes to show you how much understanding the two showrunners had of this character, because in other episode discussions, David, you and I have gone into detail about certain writers of Constantine who don't really get the character, and they often call him evil. They call him a bad guy. They say he is very selfish. He makes bad decisions that only help him. And whenever I read those headlines in a review or a preview, I just roll my eyes and say, dude, you don't get the character.
Yeah.
And in this pilot episode, using just that title alone, it establishes something very intricate and dynamic about a character without having to say it. Then by using that title as a theoretical foundation, you suddenly now have a platform for this character to grow and slowly either A, fall further into these feelings of despair and guilt, or I'm going to get up now and fix the problems I have started or initiated, which is essentially what the episode does. You have, in the opening minutes, you have a character that kind of is in self-pity mode. I'm just going to sit here. This is what I deserve.
Yeah.
And then quickly he realizes, no, this is not the penance I deserve. I need to be doing something. If I'm going to fix the problems that are coming, or that I have started or I'm responsible for, let's say, then I'm going to have to take action. So a lot of these things are there. The idea that the opening 5 minutes of the episode establishes that Constantine isn't a bad person. He isn't a selfish person. He is a person consumed by guilt and responsibility, David. And that's something that we talk about a lot as well when it comes to responsibility and its relation to consequentialism, which we've discussed in detail about Constantine's ethical origins. His ethical origins, because I don't think I've listened to any type of breakdown or read any type of essays on the ethics of John Constantine, but it's quite clear he's a consequentialist.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
And even in this pilot episode, they firmly established that notion as well. He made a bad decision. Now, there's two different variations of consequentialism, and I don't want to get into too much because we've already discussed this in detail, but there are two variations. Well, there's more variations of consequentialism, but let's go with the variants of utilitarianism. Okay, so there's two variants that I'll discuss when it comes to utilitarianism. Now, typically, utilitarianism is this idea, and consequentialism at large is about doing the greater good. That's the ethic.
Yes.
The ethic is what makes it just and right or good is if it benefits your decision, benefits the greater good.
The greater good.
Okay, which is typically what Constantine does.
Mm-hmm.
He's willing to sacrifice the few for the greater.
Yeah.
That's an actual ethic. He isn't a bad guy. That's an actual ethic. That's a morality. That's a code of conduct. Now, there are two variants of that I feel different writers will play with when it comes to Constantine. And one is this idea that, okay, you did the greater good and you intended for the outcome to be great, but it ended up being horrible for everybody. But your intentions were good, so that means you did the morally right thing.
Yes.
Then there's another variant where it doesn't matter what your intentions were, it's what the outcome is. So if your intentions were good, but you made a mistake and your outcome was bad, then you made the morally a wrong decision. You made a morally bad decision.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that this show, adheres to that with the idea of Astra, and then when you look at the parallels between non est factum as well as non est asylum, you start to see those notions of utilitarianism starting to seep through, which is a bigger factor as the series progresses. You start to see that type of consequentialist behavior rear its head as Constantine becomes a more fleshed out character throughout the series.
Well, especially since that core concept in itself is so tied to what makes Constantine Constantine. And it's one of those things that basically a lot of writers, whether it's in comics or television, have tried to chase, because the original origins of the character from Vertigo comics, that was the whole point of that character. It was his whole story was about almost that moral dilemma. Are you willing to make the sacrifices needed to do the quote unquote greater good by your own moral compass?
Mm-hmm.
Then that was that is the driving force of Constantine's narrative and all of his stories in Vertigo. Where it gets skewed nowadays is because, like, in comic books, Constantine now is seen as not just as a normal, relatable character, but he's seen as a superhero with superpowers. So if John has superpowers, he can do anything he wants. He can solve the day. He can pull an magic artifact out of his butt and at the very end and outsmart the villain. And that's where a lot of writers nowadays get Constantine wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like, yeah, he's a super powerful and super knowledgeable sorcerer in the DC universe. But it's almost kind of like what you were saying about there's two types of utilitarianism. It doesn't matter about the outcome. it's basically it's going to happen regardless of what you choose, right?
Right.
That's the other side, and that's what's actually truly interesting about this seeing this pilot, because this is more of a Constantine from the Vertigo run, where he's a normal everyday dude trying to do the good fight. He's not like the one in DC Comics where it's like, I'm gonna make this decision regardless of the outcome because I believe it's the right thing. No, and it's like this Constantine that we see is more relatable. He's more likable. He's more,
whether we want to accept this or not, most human beings are naturally consequentialists.
Yes. And that's what Constantine is.
Yeah, because he's a very human character.
He's a
Because
very
you
human
bring up that
character.
parallel between him and regular superheroes. When it comes to, like, say, Superman and most typical type A superheroes, they're not consequentialists. They're very binary when it comes to their morality. There's right and there's wrong.
Yes.
With Constantine, it's all about the consequences. And even in an episode like that, they fully established that, because look how he got himself into this mess with Astra. What did he do? He decided to do something that probably wasn't a great idea, but he weighed the pros and cons, no doubt, and he decided to summon one demon to get rid of another demon. It wasn't to summon a demon so that the demon can rule the world and kill people. He was trying to destroy another evil.
Yes.
The consequences ended up being unfavorable. So there you go with the consequentialism. And it depends on how what version of consequentialism or utilitarianism you subscribe to. Did he do the right thing? Did he do the wrong thing? According to a lot of his friends, he did the wrong thing because of the outcome. Because the outcome ended poorly. And David, all this was firmly established without giving away too much. And just to go back to an earlier thought, David, about modern television, this idea of Nergal and Astra and the deal he made probably wouldn't have even been introduced in any way until way later in the series.
Oh, yeah.
The fact that they just use it as character motivation and to flesh out John's I guess you can say ethical underpinning so we can better understand the character, they introduce the basics of what happened.
Yeah.
And without getting you don't need to go full on. You don't need to reveal every secret, because then you'd be spoiling potential things that could be used in other episodes. But they gave us just enough to fully understand not just the character, David, but more importantly, the ethics of the world.
Yes. And that's the really truly great thing. When I went back and I rewatched this, I'm like going, this is classic television before the streaming.
Everything that you need in a Constantine story, it was able to do it without feeling like they were just jamming things into the narrative so they can say they did it.
Yes. And when you think about it, I mean, like, if you look at television nowadays, they take at least 2 to 3 episodes to get the origin of their main character or the motivations of their main character.
Why do you think there's a trend now for some of these streamers to release 2 or 3 episodes for all at once now?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about Netflix they solely do binging for the most part, binge streaming. But Disney Plus, Hulu, Paramount, Peacock.
Oh, suddenly the season premiere is 2 episodes.
It's 2 or 3 episodes now because they're not writing a tight narrative. And in order to hook people, they figured, shit, well, they're not going to know much with this first episode because we didn't do our job. So let's release 3 episodes. And even then, David, like with the shows, I'm not going to get into those shows, but there's certain shows we've covered recently where you're 4 episodes in and you still don't quite understand what's really motivating this entire show.
Mm-hmm. And it's amazing to me because at first, a jaded person might say, well, that's the landscape of television nowadays. But
well, David, you know what a landscape like that needs? a good, strong groundskeeper to just start
Yes.
mowing things down.
But the thing is, it's not just in television, because you even see that nowadays with books and comics. I've covered a lot of comics the past couple of years, and I've always told people, hook them in the first issue. Now I'm seeing like series and writers have to take 2 to 4 issues to get to their point, to get to fully introducing their characters. And it's like,
Yeah, it's happening a lot.
why is this happening? It's not like a,
You know why, David? Is because the emphasis now is on episode arc stories.
there you go.
They're not being given 100 episodes or 30 episodes. They're being given 8 episodes. So they're thinking like a lot of the television writers now.
Oh, I got to actually string my first story out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, no. They should approach it just like how Constantine approached their television. Give us a beginning episode that just encapsulates the character. And yeah, it may seem archaic. Oh my God, it's a procedural. Why in the world would you do that? Because I want to introduce my character and his theme so that the next episode I can give you a different story where basically it continues the trend of my character. Well, what about an overarching story? We can work that in.
Yeah.
But like at the end of the day, I want to make sure that my audience will constantly be talking about this episode in totality, not in parts.
No, I agree, Dave. Now, just as a preview for our future discussions coming up, all about just this pilot here, episode 1, not even episode 2, just episode 1. Moving into next year, we're going to have a couple revolving discussions, and this will be one of them. So we have the citations we got to talk about, or in colloquial terms, what people are now calling Easter eggs.
Yes.
We are going to be talking about the procedural versus serialized versus hybrid format, Catholic iconography, which is also in this first episode, Constantine's white clothing and what it symbolizes, the asylum that is actually a church. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Is there an allegory there? Is there a metaphor? Then we'll talk about the lighting, cinematography, and the idea that the producers were borrowing heavily, and rightfully so, from the film noir aesthetic.
Oh, easily. It's going to be so fun to cover that.
Having Constantine walk into the pit at the end of the episode that's on fire. We'll talk about that metaphor and what it's actually saying, the idea of this damned narrative, determinism, and hell, twin variants or doppelgangers, time-displaced mirrors. We're going to be getting into all of that over this next year.
All revolving around the first episode.
The first episode. That's how good the first episode is.
Yeah.
All right. So overall, David, I really miss pilots designed to hook the audience. I miss them.
Oh, yeah.
It is
Yeah.
a missed art.
That's why I told you is like I walked away from it angry because I'm like going, I miss this.
Yeah.
Because I miss having a complete episode where I don't have to make assumptions or jump into any conclusions because the writing is that concise and tight.
Now, we've talked about favorable reviews off and on during the discussion today. So Rotten Tomatoes has Constantine sitting at a 72%. I find that a little difficult to swallow. I don't feel like it's a 72. Maybe objectively speaking, let's get rid of all the film theory aspects and the things that make this really work when it comes to film theory.
Yeah.
It's maybe an 87.
Oh, easily. I was about
But a 72, that's
72,
that's strange.
no. And I honestly feel that the 72 is because a lot of that is affected by people who are looking at this as just a straight, it's supposed to be a superhero show. And I'm like going, no, this is supposed to be a television show.
I remember
Flat out.
I remember there were some complaints, David, a while back, or I should say when the series first aired. There were a few people complaining about it being a procedural and how that was a mistake. And I just chuckled when I read that. And this wasn't just one or two people. This was quite a bit of people.
Oh, yeah.
And I chuckled because I was like, you realize that the Vertigo series, as it started in the 80s, was basically a procedural.
Yeah. And it's so funny because people automatically use that excuse of it's a procedural, so it has to suck because the writing has to be archaic.
Yeah.
And I look at that, I'm like going, no.
Look at Lucifer.
Yeah.
That show did a procedural perfect. And that's modern television. So, and I love the way they did that series. Now, it isn't my Vertigo Lucifer.
No.
But it's still, it is technically. But I mean, it's not how I would have done Lucifer. But you can do procedurals. There's nothing outdated about a procedural if it's done correctly.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, look at the first 5 seasons of Supernatural. Look at the first season of Constantine. And look at how many seasons of Lucifer are there on Netflix?
God, I think
Let's just say 5 for the sake of argument.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how you do it. So, all right, David, we'll be back later. No, we won't. What am I talking about? Will we go into break? What, we have breaks now all of a sudden?
I was about to say.
We'll be back after these messages.
You're becoming nostalgic for classic television, Mike.
That's true. All right. Thank you, everybody. Be sure to find us on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Leave us a review. Also, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/RainmanDigital, and pledge $1. That's it. Pledge $1, and you'll gain access to our mini podcast titled The Oblivion Bar. And it's not so many, is it, David?
It's not so many.
It ends up running a lot longer than I intended.
Oh, always, because there's so much that we can talk about when it comes to like the quote unquote John Constantine verse.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, David.
Thank you.